Welcome to Lead Live, reminding you of your personal genius and how you think in order to actualize what you desire. Welcome to Lead Live. We have a very timely, important topic to discuss today. So thank you for joining us. And if you're interested, please share questions, share comments over the next 45 minutes, and we'll be sure to make certain that our guest has the opportunity to respond to those questions and comments and stay on target. This is all about leadership. This is all about mindset. And so as we talk about the topic, Afro-Latinidad, we want you to consider the current state of affairs and your preferred imagined reality. Take a moment, reflect. Let's reflect on urgent dilemmas, the Black Lives Matter movement, and our corrupt administrations, criminalization of immigrants, in addition to the coronavirus 2019 pandemic. That both the Black Lives Matter and the criminalizing of immigrants are generally considered to be quite distinct and separate issues. Yet as our guest John Santos informs us, there's only one struggle. Afro-Latinidad is key to understanding and uniting behind these and many other issues of civil rights, human rights, and justice, both domestically and internationally. So we ask you to consider the question, do you value disruptive leadership to produce better solutions? Think about that too for a moment. And as you think about that, I want to ask John Santos to join us to discuss this one struggle. I'd like to highlight a few of his accomplishments to date beforehand. Far more than a master percussionist, internationally renowned, multi-Grammy nominated percussionist, San Francisco native, John Santos is a prolific Afro-Latin band leader, composer, teacher, writer, producer, and cultural activist with a musical career of over 50 years in the Bay Area. He has worked with acknowledged masters, including Dizzy Gillespie, Tito Puente, Bebo Valdez, Max Roach, Eddie Palmieri, and Omar Sosa. He is an advisory board member of Oaktown Jazz, Living Jazz, and the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance in New York, as well as a trustee of San Francisco Jazz. And if you were lucky, like a friend of mine, you saw him just recently live presenting, performing Friday evening. Mr. Santos is on the faculty of San Francisco State University, the College of San Mateo, and the California Jazz Conservatory. He has taught Jazz Camp West since 1986. His next CD, Art of the Descargo, is scheduled for fall 2020 release on Smithsonian Folkways label. November 12th, 2006 was proclaimed John Santos Day in San Francisco by mayoral proclamation. Now let's welcome this husband, father, colleague, friend, confidant, thoughtful civic leader, and justice advocate, reared in San Francisco and raised by his beautiful parents in the Puerto Rican and Cape Verdean traditions. John, please join us.
Wow, thank you for that lovely intro, Dr. Webb. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your program.
It's an honor to have you here. Lead Live benefits from individuals like you who are not only living their genius, but live it in a way where they're leading. And you lead with distinction. And I'd like for you to share just a little bit about yourself that we would otherwise not find online, something unique. Can you share that briefly?
I'll try, although my life is kind of an open book since the invention of the internet. Being a musician and a teacher here in the area and having lived my whole life being born and raised here, I find, that people tend to know my business, but I would say the thing that's maybe a little less known is, our family life. I have two children, two beautiful children, 12 and 15 years old. They both are students at the Oakland School of the Arts. My wife is a wonderful writer, and she writes children's books, and she's a poet. She's with Scholastic Publishing, and she's doing some wonderful work as well. And we have a artistic household. My wife and I. One of the things that brought us together is our activism and our understanding how the arts are so key to everything in our community. They're key to learning, and they're key to joining, uniting, and creating a solidarity among movements internationally. The arts are so important in teaching the kids, and we both felt strongly that the arts are actually the most important element in teaching children. And for that reason, we homeschooled our kids actually up until the 6th grade. And that burden fell mostly on my wife because she's a teacher, and she's just tackled that head on at a time when I was traveling and touring, and I couldn't do all that work myself. I helped her with it, but it was really her thing. And so we have a household that is very much centered in the arts. We're all artists here, and we respect and love that legacy that has been left for us. I had a great friend, poet from New York. He was an Afro-Puerto Rican gentleman by the name of P.D. Thomas. And P.D. lived here in the Bay Area for the last 30 years or so of his life. And we became close friends. He was like an uncle to me. And he wrote so much powerful material. But one of the lines that he said, he had a poem that he called "Every Child is Born a Poet." And that resonated with me so powerfully, and it's true. It's when we take the arts away, which we did in this country. We've really, as a government, we've gutted the arts from public schools. We've gutted the state arts councils, and even the NEA has been under attack because of the progressive leanings that the arts bring. The arts bring people together, and the powers that be don't really want us to be so together. So all of that, I think, is maybe something that's a little bit more under the radar, but at the same time, it informs all the work that I do. So most people that know me know where I'm coming from with that aspect.
That's powerful, and I agree with you. I've often said that arts really opens the heart of the person on the receiving end, and arts transform the understanding, the internal consciousness of the person who's engaged in it. It literally access, I think, the highest source. And what better way to honor the person than to expose all of us to the arts? And that's why my space is basically an art gallery. I love to watch sports, not just, I don't want to see people beaten up. I love the art embedded in the work that these remarkable people do, whether they're running, whether they are they're jumping, or it's all magical art. And certainly, of course, creating with the hand in terms of paintings and sculpture and using musical instruments. And when I've seen you historically live, it's almost like I can't tell the difference between that instrument that you're using in your body. You've just become one. It's a perfect reflection of what I believe life is at its core. What are we? We are vibration. What are we? We are energy. We are housed in these temples, and hopefully we treat them as temples, I say. And yet the essence of us is what? We're vibration. And you know it best, because what you do, and what so many scholars across this planet and locally and beyond, is you illuminate the power of that vibration. The heart can't help but open and open. And before you know it, something has entered that has, even if it's just for half an hour or for a day or a month, has transformed the nature of my consciousness. It's powerful. So you're right. You're right.
One of the aspects that I think is most important about the arts, about music and all the arts, is the aspect of storytelling. It's really the thing that brings us together. It's what makes movies, when they're done correctly, when they're produced correctly by good storytellers, so powerful, is that the stories, we can relate to them. It humanizes and it creates empathy. It makes you understand that we are humans and we have the same heart and we have the same aspirations for our families and just for our well-being as a human race. That storytelling aspect is really important, and it allows us to express ourselves and tell our story in our own voice. And that's very important, especially for communities of people who the history books have been written for us and not by us.
True. Roy Robles, who we both know and value and love, says hi.
Roy is my great friend. Roy is part of our homeschool community. His children and my children have grown up together in the homeschool community, and we're very close. We're like family. So please, I hope he's listening. I
He
send him a
is.
big,
He's listening live.
excellent. I send you a big, big hug, Roy, and your whole family.
Well, I want to get into the first question that we have, and it is, what's the nature of the relationship between Black Lives Matter and the criminalization of immigrants? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that subject is at once very complex and yet very simple, because what unites us is just the quest for justice. And that's a simple request, but it has been nothing simple about achieving it. We've been fighting for this for a long time, and communities of color, everybody knows the history of colonialism, very harsh, very violent history that has produced people like us, Afro-Latinos, who, to say Afro-Latino already is in the name, implies a very violent cultural history, colonial history that we share up and down the Americas and with other communities in the world. So the idea of equality, it overlaps a lot with this issue of race, which is a man-made issue. People learn racism is a learned behavior. There's not a child is never born a racist, and you learn that behavior. So we can unlearn it. It's very important for us to unlearn it and teach our children the real history and real activism. So when it comes to those issues of Black Lives Matter and the immigration issue, the idea of racism plays strong into both camps. And, unfortunately, we tend to be divided because of our colonial circumstances. We have to deal with our immediate urgent emergency, which in the case of the immigrants is, being caged and separated from your children, and you can't think of anything else at that time. However, that said, we come from Latin America also with an embedded racism. A lot of times, the Black and the brown communities, they're not two separate communities. We have the same colonial history, yet there's embedded racism. We've been turned on each other, and we have, I've heard it from both camps. And as an Afro-Latino, it's an interesting position to be in, because you're not, in many cases, you're not Black enough to fit into a Black American from the U.S. perspective. They may not consider you to be one of us or one of them. And on the same side, people could come from Latin America and be very dark-skinned and mixed with indigenous or what have you, and somehow think that the Black community, it has a whole separate set of issues and they're not our concern, and that even maybe they're less than us. That mentality is part of the colonial mentality mindset that we are fighting today. So when it comes down to the bottom line, the nutshell, I think, is just respect, love, self-respect, and the empathy that's created by hearing the other people's story. And when you finally do realize what those people went through and why they emigrated, they're just trying to make a better life for their children. They're fleeing circumstances that oftentimes are caused by the political powers from this country, and it's a very it's a web that is intricate and it's hard to navigate. There's a lot of aspects to it. I'll stop there just so to breathe and to also give you a chance to comment.
No, I need to comment less. We want to hear more from you. So please don't stop. What I want to do is honor what you said. I just remember my experience of being in Florida for a short spell as part of when I was engaged in my doctoral studies. I did a brief stint there. Uh, and I was being mentored by someone who's very well respected in the state. I won't go into all that detail. In the process, I was exposed to a lot of folks, and a lot of folks who were in elected office, in billionaires, people who had means, wealth, and I got to hear people in their own comfortable states, and it was amazing. In that short stint, I walked away understanding that if you were Mexican, you were at the bottom. If you were Haitian, you were right above Mexicans. If you were Black American, you're right above Haitians. If you were darker hue, you were right above those other groups if you were from any group. If you were white Cuban, you were at the top. It was all ridiculous. I didn't understand it. And it
Mm-hmm.
was, and yet, if you understand history, as you just said, the colonial history and the purposeful ingraining within population that there's hierarchy of acceptance of human beings as actually being fully human beings. The lower you are to that bottom, the less you are considered to be a full human being. And it's all stupid
Mm,
because we
yeah.
know biologically that we're 99.9+% identical. This outer presence is part of the magic of our beautiful shelter,
Mm-hmm.
our temple. And why are we harming each other over absolutely ridiculous stuff? And the other thing I wanted to do was to ask you your perspective of Black Lives Matter, because I've had a number of discussions with loved ones who are white, and some loved ones who are Black and Latino, but primarily white, saying, all lives matter, which is interesting because when the first time I heard Black Lives Matter years ago, that was the first thing I did was all lives matter. Of course, Black Lives Matter. But I didn't get it right away. And many people now still don't get it. So
Mm-hmm.
now I get it. And from your perspective, what does that mean? And I'll compliment you.
Well, that's a complex question also, and I may not be the best person to answer it. I certainly have my perspective. It's just that building up to answering that question more directly, I want to say that we're faced with one of many ugly remnants of colonial mentality and colonized minds is that people have been put in a position where you have to be as white as you can be in order to succeed. And so I experienced that firsthand in my family. My family on my dad's side is from Cape Verde. Cape Verde, for those who may not know, are a series of islands right off the coast of Senegal in
Yes.
West Africa. That's where my grandfather was born. On my mother's side, they're from Puerto Rico. And so these are two very Creole, very what we say criollo, very mixed communities. Heavy black influence, heavy African influence in both sides. Yet on both sides of my family, I saw how racism was embedded and passed down from generation to generation. And my grandparents and my uncles and my aunts, who I loved dearly and who I know had good hearts, they had a lot of racist views. And it came from here that if you were less black, you in this racist society had a better chance to get an education, to get a better job, and to be ridiculed less. So people straightened their hair, didn't claim their blackness, were not proud to be Creole and mixed, and be the result of a bastardization, basically of the raping, of the abuse of black women, of and indigenous women. People didn't want to associate with that, and so as a result, they would talk negatively about people who were more blacker than them, or black Americans. They would say, "Oh," and then use derogatory language. And I grew up hearing that, and I grew up with uncles that were very dark skinned, darker than me. And if you told them they were black, you got a fight on your hands. And they were, it was like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we have a real dilemma there that has to be fixed internally also from within and from within our family units. Now, with that said, Black Lives Matter is so important because in this country, it's just been standard fare that the darker skinned you are, the more abuse you're going to be. That it's almost a green light for anybody to abuse you, and especially, unfortunately, the powers that be. And the police are that representation of the powers that be. And it becomes a situation where there's privilege associated with not being black, whether you accept it or know it. You have privilege, and that's why there's a difference between saying, "Oh, all lives matter." That dismisses the fact that the out of whack percentage of black bodies that are in the prison system, etc. So I think it's really important, and I'm very excited about the possibility now of how this has come to the forefront in a way that it never has before. It's not a new problem by any means, but now because of technology, because of the phones, the police are getting busted more often. But that situation is one that is at the core of the healing that has to happen in this country, so that we can come from a place of respect and respect each other for our minds and our hearts, and not judge based on anything, based on gender or sexuality or color of the skin. All of that is pretty ridiculous, as you said. It's silly on one hand, but yet it's at the core of the problem. And where greed, because of greed, which is the what set colonialism into motion, that greed is still the overarching thing that we have to eliminate, and not have greed be on top of human rights and civil rights.
You hit the nail on the head. Whether we call it greed, whether we call it the extremes of capitalism, whether we call it the 1% leveraging all conditions to amass more wealth than the vast majority of the population, whatever we call it, to reinforce the existing systems, reinforce the need and demand for Black Lives Matter, reinforce the need and the demand to address the criminalization of immigrants. So you brought up some rich realities of why Black Lives Matter. What I did was, because I couldn't understand, and I knew that this was coming from a very solid place. These were smart people who were bringing things together. These were emotional people, and much of what we do is based upon the emotions. We know that scientifically. And they were trying to make some reasonable sense out of the desperate situation that we are in. And I came away understanding that it's not just about your life, my life. It's about the collective lives, and understanding that you treat Black lives in a healthy, respectful, honorable way. All lives are really honored, are capable of being fully healthy. When we understand that there are disparities, not just economic, not just health, not just in terms of who ends up in prison, but also who ends up dead when comes in contact with the policing state, that we understand that Blacks are disproportionately negatively affected. Native Americans are disproportionately negatively affected. Darker you people, independent of where they come from, are disproportionately negatively affected, because there's this thing in our society that's almost part of the essence of the air that we breathe, and we know it's not, but we try to make it the air that we breathe, where we need someone to be deprived in order for me to have something. This notion of finite resources, when in fact we're learning, even scientists are learning, that there's actually sufficient resources for everyone. And what I mean by that, so this whole notion of quantum physics that has developed over the last 30 years, and then there's advanced science well beyond quantum physics that'll become normalcy within the next 3 to 5 years that individuals have been sharing with me. When we understand that literally there's enough, and as we think about what we need, we help to create it in the environment. Before we know it, it's there. There's enough food, there's enough air, there's enough water, but the degree to which we say there isn't enough, we help to create those conditions where there is not enough. So when we shift as a species of humans, when we shift in this country as a society and say there is enough, all of a sudden homelessness goes away. All of a sudden, the distress that people are experiencing right now, where over 30 million people, I don't even know what the numbers are now, are without income. We will not be focused on gaming in order to stay there, where people stay in those conditions. We'll be focusing on solutions because we know there's enough. So I want to go back. You mentioned some of the current realities, and I want to highlight some of them as we move into that second question. And if anyone has questions, please just join in and ask questions. You mentioned violence. I call, as a result, insecurities that are experienced not only by Blacks, but by our immigrants. That's what is in common. Mention poverty, lack of economic opportunity. See it across the board for both groups. Mention the corruption that has happened, that has undermined those collective groups. You mentioned the importance, or at least I'm thinking as you talk, about the importance of family ties that are split apart historically because of practices in this country and beyond. And now there's deliberate practices to split families up with among the immigrants, where kids are warehoused in cages. Kids are still in cages, folks. We need to take action now. And then there's a backlog of folks who have rushed here, not primarily from Mexico, but primarily from where? There are two other countries, and I thought I highlighted them here. From, I think it's Honduras.
And maybe, yeah, probably El Salvador or Guatemala.
Guatemalans and Hondurans make up 260,000 individuals who are caught up in this state of seeking asylum, seeking some way to address the distressful circumstances in their host countries, where they are slated to be killed if they go back, and they're just stuck in this limbo. I can go on, but I want to ask the second question, as I think it allows us to illuminate some more facts. We need to disrupt the status quo in order to solve these urgent matters. Understanding the role of disruptive leadership, what do you recommend that we do strategically and immediately? You mentioned the word respect. That goes.
Yeah, well, there's a lot we could do, and it starts with the individual and in checking yourself. You know, looking at the man in the mirror, to quote a Michael Jackson song. Just really analyzing the things that we have taken on as a matter of habit and culture that continue. They prolong stereotypes that are negative. They block us, from, we don't see it in ourselves, and then it's a little bit hard to go out in the world and be objective. We have to start with ourselves and our family unit, our immediate community, and then we're going to be a little more prepared to step out. The idea that, I love this quote from J. Krishnamurti, who was a brilliant man on so many levels, but one thing that he said just always stuck in my craw since I heard it since I was almost a teenager, and it's something to this effect. I'm going to paraphrase that: it's no sign of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society. So that has.
Can you restate that? I want to hear that again. That's powerful.
It's no sign of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society. And that's exactly what he recognized, that when he wrote that in the 50s. And that's again, it's not an old thing. All these situations have been around a long time. And when we normalize it, it's because when you're told that this is the American way and you start to believe it, you've been brainwashed, you perpetuate it. The situation you described of of families being broken up, indigenous and Latino families coming up from Central America. Well, that's not a new thing. What did they do during slavery? Is the first thing they did is come here and break up family units and sell the children into slavery and separate you from your family. That was intentionally done.
And let's be clear that it didn't stop with slavery. As recent as the 60s, 70s, and I don't know about the 80s, but 60s and 70s, families could not be together in order to receive social services support. So if there was a man in the household, you likely wouldn't receive financial support. So let's just be clear, it didn't stop.
So that idea, of it's also related to, we could pull from various seemingly diverse places, but it's the same dilemma, similar to our relationship with Cuba and how we have this ridiculous economic blockade now for 60 years, which has done nothing except bring misery to the Cuban people and bring economic hardship to the Cuban people. Yet, because of the exile community, and they have their issues and their facts, and there's legitimacy to a lot of what they stand on. But this particular thing, it's a matter of saving face. They don't want to do it to admit that we were wrong, and then we complain about, or they will complain how Cuba, you want to be a communist or socialist country. Look at how people are suffering in Cuba. But if you took that blockade away and made it a more even playing field, it would be a very different situation.
Absolutely.
So we have that. We're looking at that, in every field, politically, between privileged and not privileged people from the same country, between Latinos and Black and Latinos. Another thing comes to mind. I had the great honor in 2016 of being there for the opening of the African American Museum in the Smithsonian. And that was an amazing experience. Going in there, I was in tears. It's such a powerful thing that was done. It's amazing. However, I could not help it. Like an elephant in the room, I came out of there and said, where are the Afro-Latinos? Where are the Afro-Puerto Ricans?
Exactly.
Why in the world would you separate them? Separate them because they're Latinos? These are several generations sometimes of Black Americans born and raised in this country who have fought and died in every war and who have contributed in every way during the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, we're here and we're part of this community, and that's something that I'm in communication with them about. They have a woman who's working there now, Afro-Panamanian woman, a young woman, Ariana Curtis, who is wonderful, and she's doing wonderful work. And I just met her, and I'm communicating with her, and hopefully, these things, it's like a ship. You could turn the wheel, and it takes a while for that ship to turn. And we're kind of trying to get that to happen. But we have that in everywhere you look, we have that. And it goes back to, again, when we're kids, it's so important to teach the children well and to teach them the truth and not teach them the prejudices of former generations. So when we look at, for example, something as simple as the word America, we've co-opted that word in this country to make it mean the United States, to equals America, equals the United States. And
Correct.
anything outside of the borders of the United States is not American. And that's the most ridiculous and historically inaccurate.
Absolutely.
So inaccurate. The United States is one country in North America, no more American than Central America and South America. And the heart of the Americas is the Caribbean, where our national art form, jazz, was born.
Yep.
So we have to fix those things and let people understand. Once you just open up that simple concept, well, wait a minute. As an American, I have the same colonial history as somebody in Panama or Colombia or Argentina or Brazil. We are all Americans with the same colonial history, the same issues of racism, the same issues of greed and corruption. We're looking at the same struggle. And that's why it's one struggle. That's why I say it's one struggle for justice, for equality, and for respect.
The cameras have been, because of what happened to Mr. Floyd, George Floyd, the cameras were, meaning the media, whether it's print and online media, television, radio, were so responsive to the what end up being, depending upon what source you looked at, 15 million to 26 million people participating in protest around this country, and in at no less than 13, almost 1,400 counties, 40% of the counties in the U.S. Uh,
During the pandemic.
During the pandemic, risking lives, where people would say when they were recorded, interviewed, I'm concerned about the pandemic, but I'm more concerned about not showing up, considering what's going on. I didn't know. And that 16-year-old who I send out a lot of meditative energy towards to support her, who was unwavering in capturing all of that, ensured that the world could see what you and I know about on a local level. Okay, I think about my brother when we were in foster care and we were taken to Louisiana, and he comes running back. He was not supposed to go off on his own, but he wasn't even 10 years old. He comes running back, as beautifully dark as he was. He was almost just ghostly like. He had witnessed, this was in the 60s, late 60s, he witnessed a man being strung up. And the whites turned around and looked at this little boy with a big head and said, if you don't get out of here, you're next. So he rushes home. And so that wasn't long ago, folks. And then to see someone lynched by having a knee on the neck and intentionally killed with absolute gravitas, shook this country up. But in the same way, I can remember the cages shook the country up. But then all of a sudden, we just go back to normalcy where we're quiet. And that's my concern, is how do we go outside of this? Wow, we're so, oh my goodness, we gotta protest. We've got to send in a letter. We've got to convey our concern. And then all of a sudden, before we know it, we go back to where we were. And that's old news. And hopefully someone's addressed it. How do we change this stuff right away?
You know, Elnora, I think that there's a lot of things we could do, and we have to make it part of the fabric of our everyday life. It can't be something we do on the weekend or something that we write a letter and then we're good. You know, there's a lot of things. For example, speaking up is one. You know, you have to speak up where you see that injustice. You know, John Lewis spoke about that a lot. You have to be able to recognize that, you know, it's scary. They've made it scary to speak up. But if we don't speak up and we don't use our voices and we basically co-sign what's going on. If you're not part of the solution, you're kind of part of the problem. By being quiet, you're quietly co-stamping the activities that the government is doing in our name. Also, I think we have to reclaim our kids. As I mentioned earlier, the kids are the most important aspect of this for so many reasons. I mean, it's the reason why we are so passionate about it. What we're leaving for our kids. You know, we're going to be around just a short time. The kids are going to have to deal with the greed that's going on now and the BS that's going on now. The kids are going to brunt the burden of that. So we have to educate them early on. You know, it's a shame because it'd be nice to just let the kid be a kid, you know, and not have to worry about all that stuff. But nowadays we have to kind of politicize in a way, or at least make aware these kids, because like you said, your brother as a child is going to witness some things that you're going to have to be able to be prepared to talk about those things and to give some support to the children who are witnessing this destruction of the planet and this greed and the normalization of those things. So I say we have to reclaim our kids, because our kids there's been a direct evil, insidious marketing to our kids to tell them that eating all kinds of crap and preservatives and sugar and all this bad stuff, if it's got a nice color, nice package, you market it to the kids, you sell it to the kids, you get the kids thinking it's cool because they saw it on TV or they saw it on an ad. Unfortunately, again, we have to talk to the kids and say, look, this is not cool. There's people who are doing this for a reason, and you know, explain to them a history that I would prefer to tell them much later in life so they could enjoy as a child. But we have to reclaim our kids. Our kids right now are owned by the screen, by the phone, by texting, by the gaming. And the gaming is very realistic and very violent. So that also has to do with normalization of killing people. It ain't nothing to see somebody get their head chopped off. Doesn't mean nothing. So we have to, that's part of the homeschool community thing, is to let the children live, let the children understand, discuss, let them see the world and use art and be expressive and, come together. So reclaiming our kids, when we leave our kids, we're in a situation, most people, you got to go to work and you leave your kids to the system, and the system is designed to co-opt your kids, and they've been successful in doing it in terms of from everything, what they eat, to the fact that they want to spend every waking hour from the time they get up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night on the screen, and it does something to the way that kids learn, the way that the brain works, the communication skills are disappearing, the ability to write is disappearing, and that's urgent. So that's something I think that's very important, and that coincides, it crosses over, overlaps with food justice, because that's another issue that is big. Who gets to eat organic, healthy food? Most people not. But communities of color, not. Working class communities, not. You don't get organic food, and you have to pay more for the food that they put preservatives in and pick before it's ripe, and you're not getting the nutrition at the same time that they're toxifying the atmosphere, the water, and the air. It's a double-edged sword, and we have to be really aware and teach the kids that no, sugar-filled soda is not cool for you to be drinking, and et cetera, all the way along the line. We have to be vigilant as consumers. And one last thing I'm going to mention is there are people of conscience who are working in politics. They're few and far between, because the ones that are mostly out there in both parties, unfortunately, this system is the right wing and then the supposed left, which they're only a little bit left of the right wing. They're very conservative, the Democratic Party. We don't, and they've labeled us, in a very infantile way. Oh, that's socialism, that's evil, that's communism. But yet, the socialist concepts, which are for the good of everybody, using public monies for everybody's good, that's what makes this country great. So there's one example I want to give is the bill that is on the governor's desk as we speak, AB 1460, which is the bill to make ethnic studies a requirement in the college university system in the state. And that's a big issue, and there's a big lobby to shoot it down. And yet it's a big step, because why not? The history that we've been taught is the history from the perspective of the colonizer. Why shouldn't everybody's perspective be there? You need to learn about the Arab experience and about the Latino and the Afro-Latinos and all the way down the line, and about all of the great religions of the world, not just Christianity. And so all of that is involved and implicit in this bill. By making it a requirement, it's like leveling the playing field. Let's hear everybody's voice. You would think it would be a slam dunk, and it's not. There's a lot of resistance to it. But those are the kind of things that we have to put our ear toward, find out where they're at, get behind them, and do what we can to push those through.
Okay, I want us just to take that in, because you've shared a lot of nuggets. I call them gems. And at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, and at the end of the day, what do we all want? We want a lived experience that honors the self, edifies the spirit, enables us to live our genius, our expertise with fun, with happiness, with joy, with folks we love. And if we don't have folks we love, to develop relationships that are complementary. All of us want that. Whether it's navigating the terrain of a business that we ourselves are building, or working for someone else who's running a business with the kind of integrity that we value, or whether it is transforming a village so that people have great running water that is clean, refreshing, that has infrastructure beyond that, housing, where people have access to running water, where they have shelter, food. And as you said, there's not a food desert. They're able to cultivate the soil so that they're actually able to grow their own food and serve those within neighboring communities. And it's interesting when you said socialism, when you said communism. I don't know if you said communism or whatever, but most people don't even know what socialism is when they use the word. They just know what it feels like because of what they've been told socialism is all about. If they read and study socialism, they're like, oh my goodness, I actually like that, but I better not tell anybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If they read and understand the history of capitalism, they can understand that there's some aspects of it that actually serves the greater good, but there's inherent structural aspects of it that are about this finite resources, and it really embeds greed and it harms the spirit of a nation. And so the key thing is learning. And the fact that you and your wife primarily with you as support, chose to educate your children so that they would be empowered to go out and be able to navigate the terrain, use their critical thinking faculties before someone said something and they just automatically receive it as empty vessels. They're full vessels. They can critically analyze that stuff and decide to choose. And that's the power of someone who is leading. So your wife is by definition a leader. You, because of the nature of what you've been doing, are by definition a leader. You're encouraging people to understand their capacity and you're giving them tools to develop that capacity. So wherever they're at, they're able to leverage that, whether it's in terms of voting, whether it's in terms of literally driving outside of their community because there's no grocery store that has fresh foods, getting fresh foods, but looking on the label to make certain it doesn't have these toxic chemicals that actually harm the body, affects the brain, the thinking processes. Part of the issue across this country, we have a lot of food deserts. They're not just in Black and brown communities. There are a lot of poor white communities. And so the fact that a lot of us are not thinking clearly, well, we don't have the right food that we're digesting. The fact that a lot of us are sick and harmed is because of what we're digesting, not only the food, but the information we're taking in that's affecting our mindset. The degree to which we clear ourselves from the harms that we create and reinforce in society, all of a sudden things begin to shift. So talk to me briefly as we begin to wrap this up, John, because you've shared some very powerful, just simple, elegant information about our responsibility for one another,
Mm-hmm.
especially for our children. Share with me, if you were to say three major leadership roles that each one of us has, whether we're adults or even children, responsibilities that we have for society, for life itself.
We have to love ourselves.
Mhm.
And by that, I guess mean, again, not to fall victim to this berserk capitalism where we're told what we should look like and what looks good and what doesn't look good. It's not about that. We are energy, we're souls, we're spirit, and we have minds and hearts, and we have to be able to see that in ourselves and then in each other. And that gets us back to mutual respect. If you don't have that respect for yourself, you're not going to be able to really have it for somebody else. And also, we have to look at the millennium of gifts, the legacy that we've received from our ancestors. This society we live in has zero respect for the elderly. When you get past a certain age, you don't look good. Supposedly, you're not. They only want you to look like you're a teenager to be on the cover of this, and that's supposedly what a model should look like. This is the image of beauty, the Miss That pageant, the Miss This pageant. We have to, you know, weed through all that and be able to understand that when we look at each other, we have to see ourselves, and we have to be able to step up, and in doing so, honor these gifts that the ancestors gave us. Number one is the environment. in the name of this berserk capitalism, which is, in my opinion, is in its death throes, which is why they're so desperate and so ugly in what's being coming down from the top, is because it's coming around. It's catching up to them. But the legacy that was left to us to respect the planet. I love the term that they used up at the it was a Wounded Knee, where they were trying to put the pipeline in and calling themselves water defenders.
Yeah.
To have to be a water defender, what a noble thing. But you would think, water is life. Water is the most elemental, essential thing that we have. And yet they defile it with fracking, fracking, and what they did to the water in the lakes, the Great Lakes, and what happened in Flint, Michigan. The water is still jacked up over there. So having respect for the ancestors, not just the elders, but the ancestors. In all of these traditions, indigenous, African, and Asian as well, and even in the oldest European traditions, the elders were honored. When you get older, you may not be a warrior who could beat somebody up, but you are respected for your experience and for the wisdom that you have lived, and that you transmit this oral tradition that has come through centuries. And it's all about respecting the spirit of life, the spirit of the water, the spirit of the leaves. They believe that there's a spirit in everything that's alive, every animal, bug, leaf, every blade of grass. You respect it. You have to leave it for the future generations, not abuse it so that you could make as much money as you can right now. That's such an irresponsible and selfish thing to do. So those are two things. I think that respect for self, respect for others, respect for the tradition that has been left for us of the ancestors, and their respect for the environment, and how we heal ourselves with plants and with what we put in our body, with the medicinal use of herbs. All of that has been co-opted to sell. And we have Big Farm, and we have a lobby in Washington so that the laws are made by lobbyists. It's gone so absurdly awry that we have to go back to the basics, I think, and appreciate what the philosophy of the indigenous peoples in this land and all around the planet have taught us. Just listen to those lessons.
My deep gratitude to you, Wado.
And me to you.
Yeah. Simple and yet powerfully transformative. I'll say this last note as we close out. When I allow myself to hear the drums, hear however the drums are created, it allows me to go to a special vibration, and all of a sudden, peace is what I experience. And I want to thank you for being one of the individuals that I've been able to go to your work, listen to your magic that you create, and then get to that peace that I think at the end of the day, we all not only benefit from, I think at some level we want. And this conversation, everyone, is really about, I call, perfect peace. When we understand the needs of Blacks, the needs of all of our immigrants, the understandings, the cultural gifts that we bring as Afro-Latinidad, that we all of a sudden begin to open up our hearts and see possibilities. And so for those of you who are listening live, I just want you to walk away and reflect. Lynn Marie says, thank you for discussing the difference between Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. Some people really just don't get the distinguishment. Yeah. Hopefully because of John's, not only his inherent passion, his intelligence, his historical reference, has grounded more of us to understand our capacity to be transformative like that. And it begins with self-respect. It begins and ends there. As we move out to the world, we interact with the world based upon our own self-perceptions. How more beautifully could one say it? Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dr. Webb, for this opportunity and this forum. We touch upon a lot of things. Any one of those things we can write a dissertation on because they're complex and deep issues that have been around for a long time. I love that you mentioned the drum because that's close to my heart, and the drum encapsulates all that we're talking about here: the ancestors, the transformation, the effort to eliminate the drum and everything that it represents culturally and in terms of identity. Yet the drum could not be silenced, and it came up like it rose like a phoenix from the ashes here in the Americas, and now it's at the center again of a community of conscience. It organizes and it reminds us, and it tells us that that power, that gift that was given to us by the ancestors cannot be snuffed out by any greed or any system like that. And so it's the epitome of resistance and of disruption, but yet in a positive way.
Well, I'd like to end by asking you to come back maybe in a few months because your historical knowledge, which we didn't even we just tapped the surface, is brilliant in terms of music, in terms of politics, in terms of life itself. And so if you're open to it, I'd love to have you back, specifically focusing on an area of history that you would like to share with the rest of us. Mm-hmm. Again, related to leadership.
Mm-hmm. I'd be honored. I'd be honored to do that.
Thank you.
If I may
Yes.
mention unabashedly, that I have a new CD that just came out last week.
Oh, it's out. Wonderful.
It just came out last week, yeah. And it's with the Smithsonian Folkways label, which for me is a dream come true. They did a beautiful job. They don't cut corners like these commercial companies would. So they put it out with full liner notes, a big booklet in English and Spanish with a lot of beautiful photography by Michael Stewart, great liner notes by Michael Ambrosino. And I'm really proud and happy of the music. It's got 12 compositions on it by my group, the John Santos Sextet. If anybody's interested, I want to just encourage you to check out, if you go to folkways.si for Smithsonian Institution, folkways.si.edu, education.
And is that FOLKWAY?
Yes, Folkways,
okay.
Plural.
Folkways. Folkways.
Yeah, .si.edu. And you'll see it there, and I'd appreciate people just taking a look. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, John. It's been an honor. And thank you so much, those of you who are viewing with us, and those of you who have an opportunity to see the broadcast in the future. Feel free to leave us a line and let us know how this has affected you. And we always want to inspire, leave you with a few tools so that you can enhance your own leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.
See you next week.